Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Layo Adegoke. We begin here in Nigeria with the visit of the U.S. Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken. He has addressed members of the Economic Community of West Africa states in Abuja about fostering democracy across the continent. Mr. Blinken says it is very important that leaders stop interfering with democratic processes, alluding to the threats to democracy in his own country. He also announced that boosting democracy is one of the major reasons for President Joe Biden's hosting of a democratic summit next month and hopes Nigeria will be a part of it.
The U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken walks into the main hall of the ECOWAS Secretariat quite unannounced before being introduced by Vice President of the ECOWAS Commission, Madam Finda Koroma. He wasted no time shining the spotlight on Nigeria's importance in U.S.-Africa relations, both now and in the near future.
What happens here in Nigeria is felt around the world. And that, in a nutshell, is why I've come to Abuja. The United States knows that on most of the urgent challenges and opportunities we face, Africa will make the difference. We can't achieve our goals around the world, whether that's ending the COVID-19 pandemic, building a strong and inclusive global economy, combating the climate crisis, or revitalizing democracy and defending human rights, without the leadership of African governments, institutions, and citizens.
Talking more broadly about the continent, he says Africa all too often is regarded as a junior partner in global partnerships, a perspective the U.S. is willing to change.
The United States firmly believes that it's time to stop treating Africa as a subject of geopolitics and start treating it as the major geopolitical player it has become. The facts speak for themselves. This is a continent of young people, energized, innovative, hungry for jobs and opportunity. By 2025, more than half the population of Africa will be under age 25. By the year 2050, 1 in 4 people on Earth will be African. And Nigeria will surpass the United States as the 3rd most populous country in the world.
He highlights 5 key areas of focus for America's foreign policy with the continent: the global pandemic, response to climate change, rebuilding economies in post-COVID era, strengthening democracies and security. He notes the rise of autocratic governments on the continent.
Authoritarianism is on the rise around the world. Technology is being used to silence dissent and prosecute citizens. And democracies must answer the call to fight back against disinformation, stand up for internet freedom, reduce the misuse of surveillance technology, establish standards of responsible conduct in cyberspace. Meanwhile, governments are becoming less transparent. Corruption is growing. In many places, elections are flashpoints for violence. And the pandemic has accelerated many of these trends. We see this happening across Africa. Leaders ignoring term limits, rigging or postponing elections, exploiting social grievances to gain and maintain power, arresting opposition figures, cracking down on the media, and allowing security services to enforce pandemic restrictions with brutality. I want to emphasize that democratic backsliding is not just an African problem. It's a global problem. My own country is struggling with threats to our democracy.
Without giving details, he mentioned the U.S. president will be holding a U.S.-Africa summit. The U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken leaves Nigeria today, having given that much-awaited foreign policy speech for Africa, once again reminding Nigeria, Africa, and the United States the importance of the partnerships that they all have. From the ECOWAS Secretariat here in Abuja, Amarachi Ubani, Channel Television News.
Well, joining us now for more discussions on U.S. Secretary of State's visit to Nigeria is Dr. Okwe Okpala, an African Affairs analyst. Thank you for speaking to us on the program. Well, you have listened to the reports that was just being played by our correspondent Amarachi Ubani. What do you make of the U.S. Secretary of State's speech and his visit in general to the country? I would need you to unmute your mic. Well, while we try to sort out the audio, let's move on to Ethiopia, where the United Nations says 6 of its staff have been released in the country, leaving 5 of them in detention. UN spokesperson Stefan Dujarric said 1 dependent is also being detained. The UN employees were among 16 detained earlier this month. Well, no reason has been given for their detention, and the Ethiopian government has also not commented about the release. There has been widespread arrests in the country following the declaration of a state emergency. Well, I'm told Dr. Okuyokpala is back with us, African Affairs analyst. I was asking, what are your thoughts on U.S. Secretary of State's visit and his speech to the ECOWAS members today?
Well, in spite of the disappointing governance quality and multitude of problems facing Nigeria, our country is still a very important member of the international community. And the Biden administration has set its agenda in terms of combating climate change and the energy crisis, the pandemic response, security, and rebuilding the economy. And in each of these objectives, Nigeria has an important role to play, both because of the size of its economy, especially in Africa, because of the population, the number of people that inhabit this country, the population of our country, and because of the resources we have, including hydrocarbon, which is a major pollutant. So it's in recognition of this important role Nigeria has to play that, it's in the interest of US to discuss with government so that we can have an agreement and to participate and to help them achieve these objectives, their global international objectives and objectives in the international stage. So the speech they made, there is something that is missing. Before now, they would have included human rights, they would have included the issue of corruption, and the fact that I didn't see them as part of the objectives, what they wanted to discuss with the government of Nigeria, can only mean either that they have given up in Nigeria or they think that relative to other countries, that Nigeria, the human rights situation in Nigeria or corruption in Nigeria is no longer, is not a priority anymore. Or that there are the other issues, which like the pandemic, the climate change, the security issues are taking priority over human rights and corruption. And so they have to, choose their priorities and arrange it in such a way that they take these other things first. But, on the issue of security and in the issue of democracy is in recession. Is in recession in Africa. Is in recession in most countries of Africa. And like Blinken said, it's not just an African issue. The whole world, since the time of President Trump, they are seen to be the terrorism and dictatorship is beginning to them to be winning the race in the world. And democratic countries and democratic government may be making effort to see that it is not a long-term defeat or it's not a long-term problem that dictatorship and human rights and suppression will take over and democracy will take a recession in the whole world.
Indeed, he has made, you've spoken about some of the issues he spoke about fostering democracy across the continent. What do you think should be, the response to this?
Well, it's important that African countries will start by giving good governance. What we restore democracy, what we make sure that democracy is enduring, is that those who are in charge, those who are in government, that they deliver on their promises, that they truly serve the people and not just serve themselves and the institutions they represent, or the groups that brought them to power. That is the best way to defend democracy. When the people are, because when there is poverty, when there is conflict, it's not difficult, it's not easy to grow democracy in the midst of poverty, in the midst of insecurity, and in the midst of divisions. What is happening in Africa is that most people, most leaders are playing one group against the other, retaining power by encouraging conflict. And that is why that, democracy and government, in recent time, there are so many coups, there have been so many coups, there have been so many attempted coups, and there are conflicts all over Africa, and because of poor quality governance. And poor quality governance breeds insecurity, and insecurity breeds poverty, and poverty and insecurity will lead to migration. And that's why many young Africans are.
All right then, Dr. Okwi Okwala, African Affairs Analyst, thank you for your thoughts.
It's always my pleasure.
Well, special envoys from the African Union and the U.S. have returned to Ethiopia in a bid to revive talks for a ceasefire and find ways to end the year-long conflict. Both the U.S. Jeffrey Feltman and Olusegun Obasanjo, the AU Special Representative, arrived in the country on Thursday. Mr. Feltman met Foreign Minister Dekeme Mekonnen, who said the government had allowed 8 trucks into Tigray and humanitarian flights into towns in neighboring Amhara region.
The field on Sudan, following the recent coup and the wave of protests in Khartoum and other Sudanese cities, we have seen yet again the de facto
The United Nations is condemning the repeated use of excessive force against demonstrators in Sudan and is renewing its call for security forces to stop committing further human rights abuses.
The field on Sudan, following the recent coup and the wave of protests in Khartoum and other Sudanese cities, we have seen yet again the de facto authorities use excessive force against protesters yesterday, resulting in the deaths of reportedly 15 people so far and an unconfirmed number of injuries. This brings the death toll of peaceful civilian protesters to 37 since the beginning of the protest against the October 25th coup. We strongly condemn this repeated use of excessive force against peaceful demonstrators and renew our call upon the de facto authorities and the security forces to exercise restraint and refrain from committing further human rights violations. Freedom of expression and assembly are fundamental human rights afforded to every Sudanese, and they need to have the opportunity to express themselves peacefully and without fear of retaliation. All those detained as a result of the protests and those held since the October 25th coup must be released.
This week, the United Nations top official in South Sudan, Nicholas Haysom, visited Western Bahr el Ghazal, where he traveled to a training center for uniformed personnel in the states to examine issues and the challenges faced by South Sudanese military officers at these centers and also to make efforts to help address them. Another task on the special representative of the Secretary General's to-do list was also to honor 848 Bangladeshi peacekeepers that have been deployed to the region.
Interest to us was to visit the training center and to get a visual sense of what it's like for the trainees and instructors at these training centers. And I must say the conditions are miserable. Clearly inadequate, and this is something that requires attention, and we'll be taking it up with our interlocutors in Juba.
The U.S. has ended sanctions imposed on Burundi 6 years ago, citing reforms in the country. A U.S. statement noted that President Joe Biden had revoked an executive order that authorized the sanctions. It acknowledged last year's elections that brought in President Evariste Ndayishimiye and the reforms he has pursued across many sectors. Well, U.S. Secretary of State said they recognize the progress made by the president on addressing trafficking in persons, economic reforms, and combating corruption, and the president who's also encouraging continued progress. The U.S. and the UN imposed sanctions against Burundi back in 2015, including visa restrictions and freezing of assets of key officials in the government. This came after the country descended into chaos after President Pierre Nkurunziza launched a bid for a third term in office, despite concerns over the legality of the move. South Africa's state-owned electricity provider Eskom says it has found clear evidence of sabotage at one of its power plants. It says one of its high-capacity pylons was brought down when all 8 of its support rods were cut. Claims of sabotage at Eskom's fleet of aging coal-fired plants aren't new, but the company says it's the first time it's had proof. The debt-ridden energy giant regularly implements power cuts, which are usually blamed on mismanagement, but the government is now trying to clean up the company. However, it's not clear who's behind the sabotage, but fingers are likely to be pointed at politicians with an interest in seeing Eskom and the government fail. Britain's Prince Charles has appealed for a common effort to preserve the environment after visiting historic Cairo and the Giza pyramids on the first night of a 2-day trip to Egypt. After arriving in the Egyptian capital from Jordan, Prince Charles and his wife Camilla were received by President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi before heading to Al-Azhar, the 1,000-year-old seat of Sunni Islam learning.
Gathering by this wonder of the ancient world, we are reminded of miraculous feats. Indeed, Herodotus reminds us that Egypt has more wonders in it than any other country in the world and provides more works that defy description than any other place. Like our rather more modest ancient stone circles in England, the pyramids remind us of a connection to our planet that we have over time forgotten. We should heed such wisdom and rediscover a sense of the sacred by learning to live within the bounds of nature. As President Sisi steps forward to take on the presidency of COP27 later this year, the United Kingdom will be with Egypt as your friend and partner in this epic struggle to protect and restore our environment and to build a better future for us all.
Welcome to our Africa Tech segment. A Nigerian edtech startup, Sabi Teach, is helping learners find trained tutors for their learning engagements. The startup seeks to solve the rising demand for quality teachers in the country.
At this education technology startup, Sabi Teach, the aim is to help learners locate qualified tutors in their neighborhood. To bridge the educational gap in the country, they are assisting children find the right teachers that can help them through tight spots in school, removing the barriers of location and accessibility. According to data from the UNESCO Institute for Statistics, Sub-Saharan Africa has the largest teacher gap, and the region will need about 17 million primary and secondary teachers by 2030. But even though the national policy on education stipulates that the teacher-pupil ratio should be 1:40, the ratio is, however, exceeded in most schools, especially in urban areas.
In Africa, there are lots of problems, from the demand for quality teachers to the overwhelming class population of students. Right now, the required is 1:20 from the UN, but right now in Nigeria, we have an average of 1:60 students in class.
The startup, founded in 2019, was already developing a solution that no one thought would be relevant in the pre-COVID world. But when the pandemic hit, the tide changed.
We already had the foresight as an organization that the next phase of education in Africa is going to be online. And then we started developing the Sabitich idea. That was middle of 2019. And all of a sudden, the pandemic came in, and it looks as if we had a solution ready for the pandemic that happened, and that fast-tracked how we quickly built Sabitich to be able to solve this problem.
By creating a tutoring marketplace, the startup, through its database, provides tutors that can be accessed using a learning style algorithm. Navigating the platform is made easy for each learner, and the tutors create a well-mapped-out learning plan for their routines. The startup, in its quest to bridge the education gap, is also helping learners fund trainings, regardless of their financial capacity, to accelerate their educational growth.
Egypt is sending a team of soccer players to participate in CANAF, the Cup of African Nations for Amputees Football, that will be held in Tanzania at the end of this month. With all players on crutches, defying all odds, the Egyptian amputee soccer team prepares for the African Cup.
Egypt's national amputee soccer team will be wheels up on November 23rd, heading to Tanzania for their first appearance in the African Cup of Nations for amputee football.
We have a competition on the 26th, and we are hoping we can make history as achieving something during the first ever competition we participate in. We want to do this for Egypt, and we want to raise Egypt's name on the world stage.
The newly formed team has been training twice a day since September, with players scouted from across the country, around 17 selected from 150 for the competition.
We prepared 17 players who will play for the first time in the African Cup, and this is the first time they play collectively as a team as well. There were a few obstacles in the beginning, especially since the team only trained once a week, but we were able to improve their fitness levels after conducting the necessary physical tests, and we did really well in the past period, and we are hoping that after our participation in the competition, we'll come back with a trophy for Egypt.
The young players will face Nigeria and Ghana in the Cup's group stages, where they'll also be playing together professionally for the first time.
Our ambition is that we take the Cup, so upon our return, we can set up an association and a league and have teams that some of our players could join. We only have 150 players now, but I'm sure there are more amputees in Egypt who want to play, because this sport is in every country in the world.
Egypt is one of the few Arab countries with a national team of amputees, also known as crutches soccer. Winning the cup means the team has an opportunity for national representation in a league and will up their chances of qualifying for the World Cup in Turkey next year.
And that's it on the program today and for the week. Thank you so much for being a part of it. Olayo Adegoke.